Hello, and welcome to an illustration video for the Pokemon trading card game. In this video, I'll be taking a look at T.D.K, which stands for Thundurus, Deoxys, Kyurem, and I'll just be going over my illustration process for the four images you see here on screen. I'll be breaking down some of the things I think I did right, some of the things that went wrong in these illustrations, and just in general, some of the things that I would do over if I were to start this project again from scratch. By selecting a Pokemon deck list, I was really able to give myself a focus list of characters to work on and create a manageable sized project that I could finish in a reasonable amount of time. With that in mind, we're going to take a look at our first character here, the front and center Pokemon trainer, Colress. Now, the first thing that you'll notice is the proportions of the figure that I have at play here. My original intention was to base this on the Pokemon Adventures manga and how those proportions work, but honestly, I'm not quite sure how well I've captured that here. If I were to do this illustration over again, I would definitely play around with that a little bit more before committing to the final image. Well, I think some of the details like the buttons on the jacket or the Colress machine or the glasses are pretty nice. I'm not sure how I feel about the proportions combined with the flatness. I feel like this just feels like a very cookie cutter image where I would have probably liked to see a little bit more dynamic range of motion, creating a little bit more of a three-dimensional element in the posing. With that in mind, I would say some positives for this illustration definitely come in the color palette. I really like how the icy blue highlights are contrasted by the red-violet shadows, and that contrast creates a really nice dynamic range that does help add some dimension to the illustration where otherwise it would have just appeared very, very flat. I would say one of the unique features of Colress is definitely his glasses. It's got framing on the bottom side, but the top is just exposed glass. I don't know why, but I just found this to be a really interesting detail that I'd never noticed before, so I definitely wanted to make sure that made it into the final illustration. Another area of note is probably the glow on the plasma energy. I mean, what can I say? It's plasma energy. You have to go for it on there. Up next, we're going to have Thundurus. Now, I really like the idea in the pose for this illustration as compared to the last one. You can see it's very radial, and I tried to use that tail swooping in towards the camera to really accentuate Thundurus moving in a circular, flowing type fashion. This is contrasted by some of the other shape language that you see here in Thundurus, the clouds on its claws and the clouds for its hair and facial hair even, really make for some nice soft to lightning strike style elements that just speak to, obviously it's in the title, Thundurus overall. In this one, the colors are very, very saturated, but because I have so much contrast from the white cloud elements, I think that it still works. I probably would have pushed the shadows a little bit deeper, especially on the tail. I would have pushed that further into a shadow element because it's supposed to be behind Thundurus, and I assume the lightning kind of follows. It's almost like unicorn horn towards the front, letting that be the central lighting element, and then pushing shadows more towards the back. But overall, I think this purple, magenta, ice blue, and yellow really work well together, and it still sticks in that plasma wheelhouse that I was going for across all four of the illustrations from this deck. Now, up next is probably my favorite from this series, and that is going to be an illustration of Deoxys. You can see I didn't even do much with my undersketch here because I really knew what I wanted to go for. I think Deoxys is just such a great design to start with that it makes it really easy to get that alien feel just from the shape language that's at play. Is it rubber? Is it metal? It's kind of this weird mixture of both, creating this dichotomy between organic and machine that I just really, really like in the design. While the pose is flat, I feel like he's leaning with just enough posture that it still feels like it has weight. And putting weight into illustrations is definitely something I want to focus on moving forward. For the color scheme here, I mean, Deoxys has it pretty much set in stone to create contrast just from the basic design. The teal compared to the orange, I think, works nicely here, and I really tried to highlight that with some burnt orange highlights and some purple shadows that create a nice dynamic range for it overall. One interesting element is also the glow effect from the orb at the center of Deoxys. I'm not sure what the lore behind this is, if that's where his energy comes from, or from, the other kind of alien jewels on the mask. I wasn't sure if that was metal or liquid or just this kind of weird amalgamation of both. But overall, I just really, really like this illustration. I like Deoxys as a character, and I like what I was able to capture with this one here. Now, last but certainly not least is Kyurem. And speaking of adding weight to the illustrations, I feel like this one probably accomplishes that the best. Now, I've got some pretty dynamic posing going on here, given the rigidity that Kyurem normally works with. It's a frozen dragon, so I don't picture it in motion as having a huge range of motion, but it definitely feels like it moves with a sense of purpose. And you can see that in the wings, the claws, and those are the front claws, as well as kind of its claw tail. That's a really unusual design, and I'm not totally sure how it works mechanically, but it does balance the illustration overall and just in general. So something that I might change for this is I feel like the neck looks a little strained, but overall I think the intention and mood of the Kyurem really works effectively here. It feels like a Kyurem, and that might be best represented by the overall colors that have been selected for this image. I really pushed that cyan turquoise, and it almost would have been too much, except the desaturated yellow really balances that out nicely. I think gray and yellow kind of always go together well, and I don't like a ton of saturation in my yellow. So when I knew that I had these really desaturated elements, that gave me kind of free rein to really go all out with the ice and just make it as icy blue as possible. But in this case, I really tried to add just a hint of green. Like if you catch it in the right light, if you look in a certain spot, it does look a little bit more green than blue, and I really, really like that. So here are the 4 images put together into one final wallpaper. The background has just been texturized from a free, copyright-free image from Unsplash that I've just filtered and effect and gradiented and half-toned to just kind of add that illustration feel overall. As I look at this set together, I think they work pretty cohesively as a set. Some of the flaws and some of the lesser illustrations are definitely propped up by some of the better illustrations, but they definitely feel like one cohesive unit. It feels like a team. It feels like a series that was created together, not 4 parts that just happened to be able to be thrown together at the end. So I definitely like that overall. I would say my 2 favorites are definitely the 2 on the left. The Deoxys and Kyurem work well. I would say the Colress and the Thundurus, if I were to do this over again, is something I would consider changing maybe the pose on and just making sure the dimensionality that I was shooting for in the other ones was represented in those as well. But with that being said, I think that's all I've got for this video. I appreciate your watching, and there's more to come in the future.